Our presenter, Mary Beth, I'm going to have her introduce herself. But just letting you know again that she'll be asking self-reflection questions during this presentation, and you're free to share them in the chat, but any outstanding questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. So I will turn the time over to Mary Beth.
Well, thank you, Hannah. My name's Mary Beth Vogel-Ferguson. It's really a pleasure to be able to be here with you today. I thank the team and the coordinating group for the invitation. I really feel at home with Davis Links. Some of you may be familiar with Woods Cross High School. I was in one of the first graduating classes of Woods Cross High many moons ago, so I feel at home with this Davis group. The experience that I think that's relevant to this conversation is really the last 26 years or so that I've been working at the College of Social Work and primarily interviewing individuals on public benefits, so people receiving cash assistance, and hearing the stories about their experiences, not only with workforce services, but with a lot of different agencies, and what the impact of that was on them, and as well as their own personal stories and how that impacted their interactions with the agencies. So hopefully we'll be pulling a little bit of that in today. As was said, I'm going to be inviting you to take a few moments to reflect on things. So maybe if you want to grab a paper and something to write with so that you can take some notes for yourself in some reflection times. You won't be asked to share anything, but there will be times when I'll ask you to put things in the chat. And if you feel comfortable, that would be great. So I think that's where we're going to go. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And I almost forgot to do that. Hopefully Travis or Deb would have reminded me. There we go. Can we see that?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. So that's the slide that should have been up when I was saying all those things. So there we go. So let's jump right in. Today, we're going to start with doing some trauma basics. And I always think that's important because I find that there's many different definitions and understandings. So just to kind of level set to get us all on the same page. Then we're going to jump into that trauma-informed approach, thinking about what it is, what it isn't, going through some examples, and then how do we measure that? How do we know when we're implementing the trauma-informed principles in the work that we do? We're going to talk about how that fits into the larger trauma-informed approach, into the bigger picture, and maybe some next steps that you might want to explore. So looking at that basic definition of trauma, what is trauma? Individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. I think for me, when I hear that definition, there's a couple of things that really stand out that are important as we think about our conversation going forward. First of all, that beginning part, that individual trauma results from an event. It's not the event itself. And so we can all have a similar experience, and some of us will experience it as a traumatic event, and other of us won't, because it's really not the event, but it's our emotional response, which comes from so many different past life experiences that might play into that. And then that is it experienced individually as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. So while things can be hard, and many of us go through hard things in our life, we often don't experience those things as literally life-threatening. But for someone to experience it as a traumatic event, it has that level of threat in the experience. And part of the way we know that is that it has those long-lasting effects. So it affects potentially things like our relationships, our ability to engage in work, and it impacts multiple different parts of our life, mental, physical, spiritual, even spiritual well-being that are important piece there. I like also that it talks about it not just potentially being a single event, but it can be a set of circumstances. So things that happen over and over again. So really that idea that this is an event that is experienced and has those long-lasting effects. When you think about the different events or things that might be considered potentially traumatic, there's many different things that come to mind. And when we think about those kinds of events that can be reflected here, I like this graphic because it includes in the tree a lot of the things that we typically associate with the adverse childhood experiences or the ACEs study, things that might happen in the home. But it also includes below in kind of the roots, the basic pieces of our community, things like lack of jobs, poor water quality, poor schools, poverty, racial and structural racism, all of those kinds of things that can be part of the community and be experienced as potentially traumatic. And then we look up into the whirlwind there and think about things in our environment, all of those things around us. Climate change. I know for a lot of 20-somethings these days, I hear a lot of anxiety around the idea of climate change. Things like the pandemic, we know that that has been experienced as traumatic. So all of these different things that can contribute, and we each experience them differently. When you think about these kinds of events, what are some of the feelings or emotions that come along with experiencing these kinds of events, either in a strongly adverse way or even as a traumatic way? Maybe pop some ideas into the chat. What do you think? What are some of the feelings or emotions that come up? Fear, yes, absolutely. Anxiety, lack of control, grief, yes. Distrust, all of these kinds of things, really important feelings that can be really overwhelming. I think as we think about how we work with people and how we apply the principles of a trauma-informed approach, it's important to think about what are some of the things that trauma or our experiences of significant adversity take away. Yes, uncertainty, right? That idea that the world can't be trusted, that I don't feel safe, the people that are supposed to love me and care about me don't express those things. It's so unique for individual. And we think about that across the spectrum. While those experiences might have been very difficult for an individual, can be very different for others. And so we look at the experience, and something that I really have come to appreciate, this idea of that stress and the experiences of significant events can happen on a spectrum. So we can have those experiences that are positive stress. I think about, and many of you may have experienced, like waiting to be asked to be married, right? Or waiting to get engaged, to either ask or be the receiver of an ask to get married. That can be stressful, but it can be a positive stress. Is my team going to win? We're in March Madness right now. Many people might be watching basketball games, or even like doing a presentation like this. There's a certain amount of stress or anxiety that kind of helps me be my best. Those are all positive kinds of stresses that they get our heart beating, they get us involved, but we're able to manage it. Tolerable kind of stress actually can also be something like doing a presentation where there's a strong stress response, even to the point, I don't know about any of you, but sometimes I get to the point where I don't know if I'm just going to lose it right here because I'm really stressed. But in those kinds of situations, I can pull people around me to help buffer that stress, to be supportive in that relationship. I think of somebody that is waiting for results from med school, like this is going to mean the rest of my life. Or if you've had some health issues, you've had a biopsy done and you're waiting for the doctor to tell you what the impact is. That can be tolerable stress, but really it's tolerable a lot of times by whether or not we have supportive relationships around us. And then the toxic stress. We think about things that are chronic or ongoing, domestic violence, different kinds of abuse. Chronic pain even can create that toxic stress. And when we don't have protective relationships around us to help buffer, it can be overwhelming and it can really end up being a traumatic experience or create trauma. So think about for us in our lives, in our workplaces. I'm sure there's a lot of really wonderful good things in your workplaces and things that happen. But also there might be some different degrees of stress. Maybe positive, maybe tolerable, maybe even toxic sometimes. Those different degrees, depending on whether or not we have buffers around them, really make a difference. So I'm going to invite you just to take a moment to take out that paper and pen and write down 4 or 5 events or aspects of your workplace that actually cause you challenging levels of stress? Think about your workplace and what are some challenging levels of stress? I'm going to actually time it and give us a minute to do that, okay? Go for it. Okay, I'll give you a couple more seconds to finish up and we'll come back together. Okay, hopefully you've had a couple of ideas that have come to mind. Maybe take a moment to notice what's in your body. Thinking about stressful things can actually increase our heart rate. It can change our breathing, or maybe you feel a tightness in our chest, get a little nervous in our stomach. Maybe you're feeling okay, that's great. Maybe feeling a little extra stress. If you need to, just take a couple deep breaths, get ourselves back into a good place of being able to be attentive and listen. That stress response can sometimes feel really big, kind of feeling overwhelming, out of control. It might be the kind of thing that I feel when I run into this guy, right? We can have those experiences that can trigger that stress response and move us out of our calm, cool, collected kind of space. What we're experiencing in that response, which is really key to our survival as a human race, is that survival instinct. This response is something that we all have, no matter who we are, our family background, our intelligence, our education. It's part of being a human being. We're literally hardwired for survival. And it's not uncommon to recognize these realities in our work with clients. But at the same time, these exact principles apply to us. It's not just our clients that have these reactions. We do as well as human beings and our experiences within the workplace. So we think about that. What can impact stress? What can stress impact in our lives? Some of the stress can be positive, but excessive stress can really hurt. So we think about that stress that we may be experiencing that can impair our cognitive functioning, physical, our work skills, our social skills, our being able to interact. All of these pieces can be impacted by this experience of stress. And it's important for us to pay attention to this in ourselves, as well as when we're thinking about the people that we work with, because we want to think about how we're being impacted personally in this experience, how it might be impacting our coworkers who are having similar experiences, and even the quality of work that we're able to do with people that we're working with. So what? So why are we talking about this and thinking about the 6 key principles? Well, when we talk about implementing a trauma-informed approach, it's not just about the clients. It's about them and us, all of us, and how we're part of a bigger system. It's these pieces together. So as we think about some examples and walk through some things today, I want you to be able to kind of hold in tension this idea of the impact on myself, how I view things, what's important to me, what I might be able to do with my clients, and the impact of the system that I'm part of, the organization. All of these pieces are playing together, right? We're all human beings working with human beings. It's all part of the work. You may be familiar with this document from SAMHSA from 2014. It's really a core or seminal piece. It outlines in really basic terms what it means to take a trauma-informed approach. As we work with people, we sometimes see a lot of different names. People talk about wanting to be trauma-informed, trauma-responsive, trauma-sensitive, trauma-informed care. All of these are kind of different ways of talking about different aspects of what I think is the overall framework, which is that trauma-informed approach. It's sort of an umbrella term that takes in all of the different stages and steps of what we do when we're working in a trauma-informed way. It's trauma-informed care for clients maybe, but it's trauma-informed approach overall. There's a powerful statement that's part of that document that says, there is an increasing focus on the impact of trauma and how service systems may help to resolve or exacerbate trauma-related issues. These systems are beginning to revisit how they conduct their business under the framework of a trauma-informed approach. So thinking about it from a systems perspective is something that's relatively new and really important as we're thinking about this. If we want to help, it really takes an entire system. So from that document, some of you may be familiar with these ideas of the 4 R's. Again, a foundational piece. So when we think about a program or organization that is trauma-informed, we first think about how we realize, or that to me is how we learn about the impact of trauma and the potential paths for recovery. Then we recognize, once we understand it, we are able to recognize the signs and symptoms in clients, families, in ourselves. And with that, we're able to respond differently. With that knowledge, we apply it to policies, practices, principles, so that we can actively resist re-traumatization. Let's break that down a little bit. What does that look like? When we talk about realizing the widespread impact of trauma, I think it's really important that we recognize that we have 2 sides of the scale there. We learn about ACEs, we learn about brain development and physical health issues and how the adversity and trauma can affect us personally and physically. We also want to learn about and think about the positive childhood experiences, or the resilience building, the relationship and the value of that. Because honestly, if we didn't think about and put those 2 pieces together, we wouldn't really have any hope for the future, because things are going to happen. But how do we create those relationships that are going to mitigate some of those impacts? And so when we talk about realizing, we're always balancing the impact of the event and our potential paths for recovery. With that knowledge, it really changes our framework. It changes the way we recognize and see things that happen when people come to us, clients, families, other people that we're working with. Instead of going from that mindset of judgment and jumping to conclusions about things, it helps us to get curious and step back and to say, what might be going on? What kind of struggles is this family dealing with? What am I seeing? With that curiosity, we're able to move out of that judgment. Because of that, we're then able to respond differently. And this is where the 6 key principles of the trauma-informed approach comes in. When we know the behavior is often rooted in past experiences, either toxic stress or even trauma, then we think about, how do I respond differently in a way that doesn't pile on to that lack of trust, lack of safety, lack of power in a person's lived experience? How do I work with them differently to be able to rebuild some of those core pieces? So we think about that sense of safety, that sense of physical safety, emotional safety. Where can I go when I need support and I will actually feel respected and listened to? What about that trust and transparency? Being able to feel like I have an ability to be open and honest, and that is going to be a mutual experience. Peer support, a really important key principle when we think about not just our clients and thinking about how like that peer support might work on the lived experience level, but also for those of us within the workplace. How do we get to be able to support each other in some of the hard work that we do? Collaboration and mutuality, feeling like I'm part of and not being done to all the time. Empowerment, voice, and choice. simple things about being able to feel like just because I'm a client, or even just because I'm a staff member and not in charge, that I have value and I have something to contribute, and others respect that. And then the sixth key principle, the cultural, historical, and gender issues, recognizing that we all bring different backgrounds and different experiences, and how is that recognized and honored in different ways in an organization in which I'm working. These six key principles are part of our response, but they don't just live in our one-on-one relationships. An important part of responding is being able to say, I need to think about those six key principles in multiple different areas of an organization, because it's not just in my one-on-one relationship, but we integrate it into all parts. Clients often experience certain parts of our organization. Maybe they experience it directly through us, but they're impacted by many different parts of the organization. When we look at these 10, you think about your clients come into a physical building, or they engage with different policies. Maybe they have screening or assessment services, or they get letters from your finance department. Clients are impacted by all of these different domains. So when we think about applying the six key principles, it's not just about how we engage one-on-one. That's a part of it, but it's also about how they experience the system. Because all of these pieces together are really important in being able to actively seek to resist re-traumatizing. That's our goal. We don't want in any component of our organization for a client to walk away feeling re-traumatized by their experience. It's not an intended consequence, but it often can be an unintended consequence. So as we think about those 4 R's, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, thinking about all of these pieces. Different ways that we might re-traumatize can be hard, especially when we just are focusing our own relationship with an individual client. Like, where do we go? How do we start from there? Well, I think one of the most important pieces is to recognize that it's not all the responsibility of the frontline worker. I understand that many of you are probably in that role where you're the one delivering services. You're the one that has the direct contact. For an organization to say that helping a person experience the organization in a trauma-informed way is all the responsibility of the frontline worker is way overwhelming, right? As it's expecting you not to be a human being that's going to also have your own challenges. It increases burnout and burden of that. And being able to think about the limited scope of trainings that even all of us receive to be able to do this work. We can't delegate that responsibility just to staff. So we want to think about this from a whole organization approach. How do we create systems, including us, that align with that vision of the trauma-informed approach? Share the responsibility, think about it in a more holistic way. It has to be applied in all of those 10 domains. So how are we going to be able to think about doing that? I really love this saying. Being trauma-informed is not so much a destination as it is a continual journey the organization will be on for the duration of the organization's operation, right? It becomes baked into the culture of who we are and how we operate, both as individuals and as an organization as a whole. So how do we take that and move it forward? Well, when we think about how do we do that, we really, it's really about connecting those principles and domains in many different areas. How are we able to pull those pieces together? To get that started, let's take a deeper look. We'll take a deeper look and dive into how we might be able to use our own perspective if we want to know better how to apply these principles to clients, and to start asking, what does it mean to us? So let's start with that principle of safety. When we think about what safety means, what is it? When we experience trauma, our sense of safety is disrupted, and we adapt to keeping ourselves safe in unsafe situations. The stress response system learns to work extra hard to keep us safe. That makes sense. If the world we experienced was unsafe, I want to survive and look for what makes me feel safe. As we think about that, physical and emotional safety are important. Many of us actually think about that as the safety in our organization. It can look really different for different people. You might find that you've had clients that really always insist on having their back to the door, right? Be able to identify their escape routes. Maybe some folks just feel like they need to keep their coat on inside, just feeling that security. Maybe there's a tendency to not share a lot of information, be real reluctant in opening up to begin with. There's other examples that we can see here. Safety can look like creating a warm, welcoming physical space with private areas to calm down for self-care, giving predictable schedules, even the lighting in the parking lot, inside and outside, for security, and helping us be able to maintain appropriate boundaries. These are kinds of some of the things. I'd like you to just take a moment for yourself. When you think about what safety means to you, it might be in the workplace, it might be in other places. What are some things that come up? Maybe make some jots on your paper or add some things to the chat. When you think about safety for yourself, what does safety look like? Any thoughts you want to drop into the chat would be great. Thinking about circles, what does that look like for you? Right. Being aware of surroundings. Absolutely. Especially out walking, we're often taught that. Who's around us? Financial security, absolutely. Clean, orderly areas. My husband would relate to that with you. Yeah, not so much mine. Emotional safety. Interesting. That's a great term. Those are the kinds of ideas. It's good for us to kind of unpack. What does emotional safety even look like? I think about for myself, emotional safety is being able to go into a supervisor, go to my boss and say, I screwed up, right? Yes, live in a yes, the workplace environment. I can discuss things I'm relative to. Yep. Where I can feel safe admitting that I'm not perfect, right? I made a mistake, I screwed up. Supported by others. Okay, not dismissed. Yes. How many times do we take that risk to put something out there, get dismissed once, and I'm not going to take the risk to do that again. It doesn't feel safe. Thank you. Those are great examples, because I think that if we want to think about how we apply the trauma-informed principles to the people that we work with, a great place to start is to think about for ourselves, what does that principle mean to me? What does that look like to me? Not that it's going to be the same for everyone, but it gives us a foundation to recognize that applying those principles to the people that we work with, we're all human beings. It's not just about them. It's all of us think about those things in very similar ways. Finding out exactly what it means to somebody is unique, but starting with ourselves and saying, what does that mean to me is a place to start. Another one of the principles is the trust and transparency. When we experience trauma, we may lose trust in others and ourselves. Many who have experienced trauma have reason to be distrustful of others, especially those making decisions about their lives. I think that is a really powerful statement. If you grow up with the experience of people that are supposed to love you, parents, family members, close others, and those people hurt you, what is going to make you believe that other people aren't also going to do that? So walking into an agency and asking for support, We want people to be able to trust us. We know that we are trustworthy. We want to act in trustworthy ways. But trust is something that has to be developed. And so thinking about what are the small ways that I can build into the way that I work with somebody to be able to help them know that they can trust me. So a trauma-informed approach ensures the organization's operations and decisions are transparent. This helps build and maintain trust. Organizations recognize that trust takes time to develop, especially among marginalized communities. Thinking about what are little things that we can do that reflect a sense of trust and transparency. Even simple things that can come up. This doesn't mean, I think sometimes people think that when we apply the trauma-informed principles, that means that, okay, well, we're just not going to have any boundaries. We just have to let people do whatever they want or agree to anything they say. And that's absolutely not true. That idea of building trust and transparency is about making sure things are clear, about being consistent, so that if I say that I'm going to call you on a certain day and do something, I actually do that. Or if something comes up that I can't, I make sure I let you know ahead of time and are very transparent about what's happening and what you can expect to me. Trust is not a given. So some examples, providing open and honest communication, informing clients who at the organization has access to their information and why. I heard that shared once in a group I was working with. They had clients who regularly just kind of wouldn't answer questions on assessments. And they couldn't figure out why people would just not answer some basic questions. And finally, one of the clients said, well, you never told me who's going to see this. You never told me how this information is going to be used. And it was a really important lesson, partially because most of us, if somebody started asking us questions that felt pretty intrusive, we might sit back ourselves and say, well, why are you asking me that? What's happening with this? Right? So again, to be able to think about these principles and how they apply to us. What are some of our pieces? Following through on what we'll say, building healthy relationships, creating that respect, all examples of what this could look like. So again, maybe if you are willing to take a moment and just think about, what does trust and transparency, what are the signs of that you see that tell you this person is trustworthy, or that I feel like they're being completely open and honest? Again, if you want to just jot those things down or put them in the chat, what are some things that show trust and transparency to you? Validation. Yes, yes. They've heard what I've said. Action. Okay. So somebody said they were going to do something, they follow through, they do it. Great. Accountability. Excellent. Oh, so often we require accountability of our clients, but don't think about what is my accountability to them or the organization's accountability to them, right? How do we keep that balance? Quick to apologize and offer forgiveness. Love that. Documents are clear and understandable. Sincerity. Great examples. Great examples. So many times in organizations, we have paperwork and things that we ask people to fill out. And because we've seen that form 1,001 times, we know what's on it. We know what to expect. But for someone else, it can almost feel like a foreign language, right? Very confusing. Acronyms, all of those kinds of things. Trust and transparency, we know what it means to us. Those are the exact kind of parallel things that we can use with other people. So far we've used a couple of examples. Let's see, when I'm empowered to make decisions and I'm informed and contribute to the process I'm in. Oh, so much. Because trust is a two-way street. So when I engage with the client and allow them to be part of it, really treat them as a partner, that's telling them that I trust them as well. So that sense of mutuality, right? That's another one of the principles. But when we can do that together and we can share that trust, I trust you, that helps you trust me, right? We've got that relationship piece that's going on. Great. Thank you all so much. I very much appreciate the input. So what we've done so far is we've taken a couple of the 6 key principles and said, okay, let's start with the principle and think about all of the other ways that it can be applied in the organization. So on the other hand, we can also start and think about those 10 domains, those 10 areas of an organization, or the 10 different components of how we work with an individual, and think about, if we start with that domain, how are the 6 key principles applied in that domain? So let's take a minute to think about policy. I know I've just seen a bunch of eye rolls. If you're like me, policy can be overwhelming sometimes, right? There's so much that we have to think about relative to policy. It guides almost all aspects of our work, what we do. How do we support trauma-informed principles through our policy in our organization? It might be the policy at the organizational as a whole, or the way that we engage with individuals. How can you be the best worker? And you can be the best worker in the world, but maybe sometimes find yourself running up against policy that just doesn't feel very trauma-informed, doesn't seem to be able to support the ideas of trust and mutuality within an organization. Thinking about what policy, what specific thing, what do we do in a trauma-informed way? Sometimes policy can get in the way, but sometimes we don't even remember. We don't even know the policies that we're thinking about. Couple of things. In Texas, they still on the books to these days has that there's a policy that says it's illegal to sell eyebrow balls. I don't even think I want to know where that came from or why that became a policy, but it's still on the books, right? So we have some things that just kind of linger around. Even in Utah, marriage between cousins is against the law only if they're younger than 65. Again, I'm not sure I want to know exactly where that came from, but we do things differently sometimes here in Utah, right? And sometimes things like that reflect that idea that policy can sometimes just be the fact that this is how we've always done it. This is just common practice. This is where we are. So how do we think about trauma-informed policy considerations? Policy, again, is a huge area. Think about yourself. What policies have helped you feel empowered, helped you to use your voice? Think about in your workplace. What kind of policies are there that really encourage and support your sense of all of these things of safety and trust within the organization? Maybe policies that help you feel safe, like some of the things that we were talking about under the principle of safety, some of the pieces that are in place there. Maybe there's policy around different holidays within your organization. Maybe you celebrate holidays that are different maybe than the general population, but your organization allows those to be holidays as well for you because they're part of your personal culture, which is one of our 6 key principles: cultural, historical, and gender issues. Go ahead and put some things in the chat. What are some policies that you have? A policy that allows you to attend your children's events. What? Families are important? Yes, that's great. Bereavement leave. Absolutely. Again, being able to recognize I have a life outside of this organization. Clearly outline parameters for promotion and raises to prevent bias. Excellent. Yes. Protective policies. Those are the types of things that we can look at that say, well, help me feel safe, right? That help me to be empowered to do the things I need to do. Perfect examples. When we think about those pieces of policy and how they apply to us, we think about how those also apply to the clients that we work with. Like what are some of the policies? I was working with a colleague of mine, and she was a therapist in an organization, and they had a strict policy that if somebody was late to a therapy appointment by more than 10 minutes, that they were required to reschedule. That may be a good policy in general, but for this individual, this was a single mom who took 3 buses to get to her therapy appointments. The bus was late and had missed a second bus, so she had to wait for a next one. And that was the reason why she was late, right? Is that a time when we need to be so strict with the policy? Or do we need to think about how do we create a good relationship with this individual? How do we build up their sense of trust that we believe them and that we're going to honor that, right? So policies can be really tricky as we think about some of those things. Some of the types of things that can get translated to clients, like some of the different policy pieces that impact us, we can move on to clients as well. So another area that we think about when we think about the 10 domains is our physical environment. Excuse me. Physical environment can really be taken for granted. Maybe most of you are more observant than I am, but I don't often, I just become blind to my physical environment because it's just the same all of the time. In our organization, safety is often one thing that is attended to. Maybe not in your organization, but when we think about things that happened, even like having locked sections or places that you have to key in, those are things that we've often paid attention to. But what about thinking about physical environment relative to things like where private records are stored, or if I'm going to have conversations with clients, are there private places to be able to have confidential conversations? Space for peer support activities, or is there a place that, if we're applying the principle of peer support, where people can gather and be able to debrief and have conversations for peer support? What does that physical environment actually look like? The impacts of physical environment can be huge. Actually, there's a whole movement within architecture now to think about how do we build trauma-informed buildings? How do we create trauma-informed spaces within an organization? How does the decor reflect the individuals, both the staff and the clients, so that when I walk into the space, do I see myself? Do I feel like I belong? Is this a place for me? That might be trauma-informed parks. I love it. Yes, Deb. Places that are inclusive of different people. We want to be able to think about languaging, the signage. Our physical environment says a whole lot about whether we want people to actually feel comfortable and welcome there, or whether it creates a barrier. I'll go off script for a second. When Deb said trauma-informed parks, I was just in Costa Rica, and one of the things a couple of things that they've started to do is really recognize people with different abilities. And so in their sidewalks, they have created a place for a person's, if you're blind, for their stick to be able to stay in this groove, so they stay in the middle of the sidewalk going down the street. They actually also have Braille on their dollars so that somebody that can't see can tell what money they have. Really powerful things. Couches with quiet rooms, great. Sometimes we have to really step back and again think for ourselves, what are some of the things, environments, when I walk into a place, what makes me feel comfortable? What makes me feel welcome? We've all walked into those buildings where you walk in and you look around, it's like, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. I don't, where is this office? The signage is just so poor. All of these different kinds of things can be really important to create a trauma-informed environment in how we work with things. Even something like, I was talking with someone the other day who is working with their maintenance folks to make sure that all of the doors have good stoppers on them, because they have way too many doors in their building that slam every time they close. And if you're working with folks that have a lot of stress responses, high stress responses, trauma experiences, slamming doors are not helpful. They're not helpful for the staff either. But those are the kinds of things that we can be attentive to, both within how we work with people, but also with the environments around us. I missed that last chat. Could someone who's monitoring the chat read that for me? It looked like a bit of a story, which would be helpful.
I can see it, I think.
Great, thanks, Deb.
I think it's one that says, a little while ago, I accompanied a teen to a mental health appointment. I was pleased to note that they have a separate exit that doesn't make the teen walk back through the waiting room after their treatment.
Wow, thank you. Yes, that's a great example. And those are the kinds of things that we as people that work with others can be aware of, not just, again, our one-on-one interaction, but what's the environment? What's our organization like in its trauma-informed approaches, so that we're able to be attentive to those kinds of things. How respectful that kind of experiences is. And we know that those kinds of solutions aren't always possible, but it's the idea that we're trying to be as attentive as we can to those kinds of things, and whenever possible, being able to implement them. So putting it to a real personal level, we have our spaces. I'm sure none of your spaces look like that. But when you see a space like this, what comes to mind? Besides the worker looks like they're drowning there. Might be kind of stressful. For anyone with even a little bit of OCD, it would be just like blow your mind, right? And that can be the experience for some people. There's an office like this. Some people might consider this less stressful, right? Nice and neat, organized, not too much on the desk. But when you think about it, if I come in and I've got two little toddlers running around, it might be incredibly stressful for me to come into this environment where clearly nothing should be touched, right? That's just not going to happen. So we want to think about, and when we're engaging with folks, what is the kind of environment that's going to help people feel most comfortable? The other thing I see in this is that there's quite a barrier between the person sitting on one side of the desk and the other. Does it create kind of a power differential? Am I going to get a sense of mutuality if this is the experience that I have if I'm talking with somebody? Is there a kind of a sense of a power differential there, right? Just things to be aware of. There was an office that I walked into recently, and both in their waiting room and in the individual offices, they all had just a little corner that had some books and a couple of little quiet toys, because they work with families with small kids, and knowing that if you're going to have parents coming in, they're very likely going to have kids, and just having a little place for them to be, that it's okay for them to be, was really being aware of the needs of that family and thinking about how do we work together to make this a good appointment, right? I'm doing my part as well as others. So some really simple ideas around that physical environment and how we can be part of making a difference with that. Another area of those 10 domains that can make us wonder sometimes about different pieces is the idea of evaluation. Why would that be one of the 10 domains of implementing a trauma-informed approach? Well, I think about, the purpose of an evaluation is really to get feedback, to really learn about how we're doing, what difference we're making for an individual. How can evaluations support those 6 key principles then? Feedback lets us change things. Absolutely. Really important. There's some key pieces of that, though, that we want to make sure that if we want to implement the trauma-informed approaches within our evaluation process, there's key pieces to it. All of us have been part of surveys where people ask us all kinds of questions and we never hear any results. We never see anything change. And that doesn't really encourage us to participate in future kind of evaluations. I was working with a group once recently that was very, very skeptical of doing evaluations because the last time their organization had done one, the data was actually used against them. There was a sense that there was a betrayal. I shared information with you, and now there's negative consequences coming from that. So really important that we can think about how do we improve and how do we retain trust by asking people to share, and then what we're going to do with that information. So when we ask about doing any kind of organization, when we're asking whether it's through customer surveys or employee surveys, focus groups, whatever that is, we have to be willing to actually listen, right? We have to be able to honor that voice and have that collaborative mutual relationship. When we say we value your voice, that you can make a difference, we want to do better to serve you. It really creates that sense of collaboration and mutuality. It can't just be for show. So thinking about how are we going to take that information, what's going to happen with it, how can we actually help people know that there's been a difference made? One of my colleague has a private practice, and after every session, she and the client both do a short, I think it's like a 3-question survey just about that session. Like, how was it? What went well? What could have been done differently? And she uses that information to actually make change and be able to help the client see that they're able to make a difference. So even thinking about something like evaluation, in the 10 domains, there's a lot of them that can be hard to kind of say, how does this implement a trauma-informed approach? But thinking about those pieces, going back to the 6 key principles, thinking about what it means to me and how those principles apply to me, think about then how we apply that to the client. Of course, another really big piece of trauma-informed approach within an organization is governance and leadership, right? Leadership has a lot of influence on how we do things. They're really key. So whether it's organizational leadership over your whole organization, or even for yourself, having a supervisor, how do we identify how we're going to support and model the 6 key principles in leadership? Leaders really set the vision and support the principles at all levels. Because as workers, we often can't make those system changes on our own. So we have to think about, how does leadership make a difference? We need to have people who are willing to kind of take that step out and call us on the carpet, right? When things aren't going well or when things need to change. For you in your role, we want to think about, at what place are we in the organization and how can I make a difference from where I'm at? So I've got a short video here that I think might help us see, like, how are some of our different roles in this organization? So can you see you can see the crowd, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the point of this little video is just that you have a leader who goes out front and starts a movement, and they're all by themselves out there, kind of, and people can look at them and say, you're crazy, what are you doing? And then the first follower comes along, and that first follower is actually really a leader, because it's the first one that's brave enough to go out and join the leader kind of out on the limb to be able to start a movement. And then slowly over time, the number of people joining the movement overpowers the number of people who aren't. And so then as it goes on, then the whole crowd is involved. And I think an important part of this is that sometimes we can feel out on a limb implementing these trauma-informed approaches or bringing up these kinds of principles. The idea that I'm going to start thinking about physical space. I'm going to start thinking about how I can empower folks, how I can give more voice. Even the idea that something like when we're scheduling appointments, we're so used to just telling people, well, your appointment is next Wednesday at 4:00. Well, are there opportunities where we can give them some choice and say, we've got a 10:00 and a 2:00, which one works for you? All of those kinds of things can really feel counter to sort of how we've always done business as usual. But when we embrace this idea of a trauma-informed approach, we want to be the leaders in it, but also when we see somebody out there making the effort, to join them. Don't let people stay out on a limb by themselves, so that you really can, as a whole organization, make a movement to move things forward. Hopefully, leadership is on the cusp of doing that, but sometimes we need other voices to be able to move this forward. So thinking about within administration, how do we support administration in moving that forward? For some organizations, they create champions or individuals who, in some groups, they might be called the wellness committee, or they're working on workplace wellness. They incorporate ideas of the trauma-informed approach into the way that we're doing wellness for our staff, and then have that translated into the way that we work with clients, because those policies and practices throughout the organization are all part of that movement. So leadership is there, it needs champions to support it. It really is a balancing act, because while we're thinking about these ideas and trying to think about how I implement trauma-informed approaches, we have all of the regular life to do as well. We have all of the activities and the things that we're busy doing with our paperwork and meeting with clients and doing all of the things that we have to do. And really, like it said at the beginning, it's not about a program, but it's about a way of being. So it's thinking about how we, little by little, incorporate these things in, not all at once, but as we move along. So how do we do that? How do we take those 6 key principles and the 10 domains and think about where do we start? Well, realistically, we want to start by thinking about, as an organization, how ready are we to actually do this? Anytime you talk about making change, whether it's for ourselves personally or within an organization, there's a lot of things to consider, both for you and your work, for the organization as a whole, as well as for the clients. If you believe in the principles, if you're committed to the idea, then with that resolve, we can begin to take those shared beliefs and say, how do we take and move this forward? In our work, we work with organizations to make these changes all the time. And we've found that there's a lot of different resources that are available. One piece that I'll share with you is called the TICS-10. It is a trauma-informed climate survey that's been validated and used around the country, really to get a baseline of where things are at in an organization before thinking about making any big changes or movements toward the trauma-informed approach. So I'm going to invite you, just for yourself, just to read through these 10 questions. And they're typically done on a 1 to 5 scale. We're not going to score it or anything now, but just read through those questions for yourself and get a feeling for yourself kind of where you're at with these questions. So take a moment to read through and see how that feels. You might have a sense as you're reading through of like, wow, I feel really good about what I can answer on most of these questions. Maybe it's kind of 50-50. Maybe you read through and say, wow, this is really pointing out some things that are a big challenge for us in our organization, or for me personally in my work. This tool is typically used by organizations as a whole in doing kind of an initial assessment, but we can think about it on an individual level as well, to be able to think about where we're at in our work. When there's a low score, that sense of most of these questions, I don't feel really good about how I can answer them, then that tells us that within an organization, it's probably a little early to start thinking about making some big changes around trauma-informed approaches, because this climate survey really helps identify what's the base level of our organization right now. What's our level of trust? What's our level of feeling safe? When you're going to institute something that might include some change, if you don't have that strong foundation, it's going to be difficult to get buy-in across the board for being able to make change. But when an organization is ready for change, when the answers to those questions are high, then there's some momentum to be able to say, okay, we're pretty solid in our organization as we're working right now. We're able to do some evaluation and some thinking about all of these different parts of our organization and how we might be able to make things different. So if the score is higher, or once the foundation is set, then it's time to initiate some change. And the climate's right for that kind of a change. In the handout that you're going to be giving, this is a tool that we often use with organizations and can be done with individuals as well, to think about how do I implement the trauma-informed approach. So on the left-hand side there, you see the 6 key principles of the trauma-informed approach. And listed on the top are those 10 implementation domains. It's really important that we recognize there's probably a lot of things that you're already doing well, both personally and as an organization. So in that first column, to say, what are the things we want to keep doing, right? There's some certain things that we feel really good about, that we know are solid. We want to make sure that we don't lose these in any kind of change process. In the second column, you might have identified, even through some of the conversation today, or in some of the work that you've done, there's some things that we could start. We've identified some areas that would be pretty easy to change. It doesn't involve knocking out walls or buying a whole lot of things, but there's some practices that we could pay attention to. You might also have identified some areas where you say, yeah, we need to not do some of these things anymore. There's some practices that we really need to stop that are not trauma informed, and we recognize that, and we want to make some changes. So this is one way, just at a very cursory level, to be able to think about some of the processes that you're going through. And this sheet itself is actually in the handout that you'll be receiving access to. Some of the things to consider, if you're talking about, if you feel like you're ready in making that shift to the trauma-informed approach and evaluating your organization or your own practice in that area, to recognize that it is a big step. It's really intentionally moving forward. Timing is important. Sustainability, leadership, fiscal factors. There's all kinds of different pieces that we want to pay attention to if we want to be able to start this process, to make sure it's going to be a good time and sustainable. The last thing you want, and one thing we hear an awful lot, especially these days where it feels like the word trauma is being thrown around an awful lot, is to make sure it's not introduced and then dropped. Because there's so many efforts in our organizations, and even things we try to do ourselves, we get a lot of energy, and then it becomes like the flavor of the day, right? Oh, there's this new thing. Well, next week it's going to be something else. This is more subtle. This is more foundational shifting, and that takes time and it takes intentionality. The good news is, though, we don't have to do it all at once. You know, you buy a 104-year-old house, and you look at it and you say, oh my gosh, where do we start? It's so much, it's so overwhelming. Well, you can look at it and say, well, obviously there's broken windows here, the roof needs fixing, the walls are damaged inside. And maybe it's just about stepping back and saying, okay, well, what can we afford? What can we do right now? What makes most sense? You know, if we have damaged walls inside, we don't want to change the walls first, because the roof's just going to leak and the windows need fixing. So where can we start that we're going to be able to make the biggest difference and then move forward from there? It's a slow process. In our work with the organizations and through Trauma Informed Utah, we help organizations kind of go through that process. And when they've identified they want to be trauma informed, to think about how do we do those assessments. The TICS-10 was one resource that I gave you. Again, in your handout, you'll find a list of about 20 different organizational assessment tools. Some are directly focused on people experiencing homelessness, or in organizations who work with substance use, all kinds of different things. We've actually pulled together the key questions from all of those different assessments, and we work with organizations to help design assessments that are unique for them, so that you can be able to look at your stakeholders and your needs and put together an assessment that works best for you. And that evaluation process is really the key. Once you've gone to your stakeholders and asked for input, to take that, find out what the data is telling you, explore options for barriers and possibilities, pick some of that low-hanging fruit to be able to start with, go back to people that you asked questions of and present your plan, get feedback on what might work, implement the plan, reassess how well it's working, evaluate the results, go back and see what's happening, and repeat the cycle, right? The trauma-informed approach, whether it's individually in my own practice or in the organization, is an ongoing process. We're never done, right? We don't give certificates that say, now I am trauma-informed, right? It's a forever process. And the biggest goal is to make it stick, right? So how do you do that? Going back around that cycle over and over and over again, recognizing there's always going to be ways that we can do things different. There's always going to be things that need to be tweaked. Things change, just keeping our eye on that prize. Another resource that might be helpful for you is this practical guide for implementing a trauma-informed approach. It has a lot of resources and a lot of ideas. It's available online, no cost from SAMHSA, and it's got a lot of practical ideas for both organizations and individuals in being able to apply these principles. And the next most important step is to actually get started, right? Again, things can feel really overwhelming, but there's so many little things that we can do, starting with ourselves, saying, what do those principles mean to me? What does that transparency mean to me? What does safety mean to me? What does having a voice and choice mean to me? And then thinking about how we apply that with our clients, because they're just other human beings, right? We're all kind of seeking very similar things. And then how do we do that at the organization level, right? All those stages. So at this point, I think we're about at time to open up for questions or thoughts, and I would love to have some dialogue, however that works for you. I will say before we do that, I have a QR code here. If anybody's interested, Trauma Informed Utah, we have our website the goal of our website is to provide resources. So there's lots of resources that are available there. If you want to receive our newsletter regularly, that QR code will help you sign up for that. So, and again, that'll be in your PowerPoint. So I will just move past that. And would love to have conversation, questions, thoughts.
Yeah, as questions come in, if there are common themes amongst many questions, I'll be kind of emceeing the chat. So far, we just had one question regarding the trauma-informed score info, and if it was available either in your slides or somewhere online. And Travis asked the clarifying question if they were referring to the Trauma-Informed Climate Survey, the TICS 10. But just wanted to check, Mary Beth, if that's the framework you were working off of, or if there is another link or resource that we should be sharing.
That trauma-informed climate survey the questions are listed in the handout that's being provided. And so you can find that there. And there's also a link to the resource where that trauma-informed care, that validated survey came from. So you can access the information around scoring and where all of the resources around it.
Great, thank you. As other questions come in, I'll be sure to tense out some common themes and share them here. But lots of thanks in the chat. You did a great job, Mary Beth.
Well, thank you. But I would love to also hear reactions or thoughts or ideas that you might have on how you might do something differently. Raise a hand. Oh, great. So it looked like somebody raised a hand.
I have a thought and kind of a question that I'll throw out because I think it's too long to type. But I think that one difficulty I have with my workplace in specific, but just the working atmosphere and landscape of U.S. jobs in general is that, and it's not this way in other countries from what I understand, or it depends, there is a general discouragement around political discourse for obvious reasons. It can get contentious with people sitting on either sides of the aisle or inhabiting neither space. But a lot of trauma is rooted in political upheaval and political uncertainty. It's one that I feel very strongly about. And so it's like that one area of trauma where it looms over everyone in the workplace, but it feels like it's one of those topics that can't be brought up maybe as much as other sources of trauma. So any insights you have on navigating political trauma within a workplace where generally having those conversations can be uncomfortable or discouraged, or there's fear of, formal discipline from, say, like an HR team?
That's a great question. It is a very, it's a charged environment these days, right? In many different ways. And I think that I experience that in my own environment as well. And I think speaking from our own perspectives, it's like I'm feeling, using that first person to be able to talk about how I'm feeling, and being able to, I guess, think about the context of the workplace environment to say, is it a venting, or is it something that we're working with a couple of organizations that do refugee resettlement and work with immigrants, and being able to separate what is political discourse that isn't going to be helpful to actually the situation in the moment, and what needs to be acknowledged. And if somebody's experiencing these things, respecting their experience as real, right? Not trying to get into that debate about whether my experience is real or not. And to me, that's where a lot of the discord comes from, but focusing on the issue at hand. And as Deb says, respecting differencing of opinions. But if that's not part of, if opinion giving is not part of our workplace, if that's not our goal, then really trying to stay focused in what is my purpose here? How can I be true to my truth and also respectful of other people? It's a really fine line. Bailey, I'm sorry, I don't think there's a lot of really good answers for that, other than making sure, like, if dealing with this is part of my job, if HR is challenging me on this, I've got a person here, this is their situation, I'm helping them to deal with their situation. That's different than going off about why they're in that situation and what should be different.
Yeah. No, I still think you made a helpful point of being grounded, not in the emotional expression around whatever is traumatic or frustrating about politics,
Bailey, I
but
think your audio cut out.
oh, it's my internet. It's not great. I'll respond in the chat. Thanks, Mary Beth.
Thanks, Bailey. Great question, though. Yeah. Timing is important. Timing is important. And to Bailey's point, when things are very, very unsettled, and there's a lot of, I know a lot of organizations are concerned about funding and what programs they're going to be able to keep going, where they're heading. It's probably not a time to do a big organizational overhaul. It doesn't mean you can't still keep these 6 key principles in your mind and be aware of, how can I make little differences? How can I personally do these pieces? Balancing those things is important. What else is coming up for folks?
It looks like, sorry, all of them came in at once. Hold on. Okay, Jade was saying that she loves that you evaluate whether now is a good time to implement something new for like the readiness of change of an organization. They hadn't thought of that before, because trying to make big organizational change when there's like a low likelihood of acceptance or success can just make people burn out and can decrease trust.
Yes.
Let's see. Cheryl said, have there been changes made to improve trauma and TIA in organizations that you have seen that have especially made a positive impact? There are so many areas to choose from.
Yeah, it's true. You take 6 key principles in 10 domains, and you've got lots of iterations, right? But I think that's the good thing for an organization, is to be able to, once you've done an assessment, it really gives you a place to be able to think about where to start. And I know that we've been working with some different Head Start groups. And as we went through, it was really clear that the staff didn't feel like they had a voice, that their process of evaluation and getting the feedback loop was getting short-circuited. And that came through in so many parts of the assessment that the organization took a step back and said, okay, we're really going to look at how these processes happen and think about everything from how we ask the questions to how we communicate the changes that we're going to make. And so they put together that process. And a year later, when we did another evaluation, they were able to really feel like people, well, I mean, just because I asked for something doesn't mean it's going to change. But the fact that I feel heard, I feel respected, I feel like I get that information, it comes full circle. The degree of participation and ownership in that process went up dramatically. So it really is targeting things and then taking it all the way through the process like that.
All right, we still have a couple more minutes for questions if anyone has any more, or just thoughts or comments.
Deb has her hand raised.
I was just going to say that in this group, we've had some discussions and presentations on the Dignity Project when it's difficult to bring conversations to the table, but how to do it without causing people to feel contempt for what they say.
Well, I'll think about the last part that you said there, Deb. We can't always control how people are going to react to what we say. All we can do is think about what's the way that I can say it in a way that is most respectful, but honest. And then look at the environment and say, is this a time or place for that conversation? Sometimes the conversations happen in a stressful enough environment that no matter how well we couch it or no matter what we say, it's going to be hard for someone to hear and just to be ready for that. Right. So
exactly. Yes, exactly.
Sometimes it's about setting ground rules. I think, with that key principle of peer support, it's so important in our work that we're able to talk with our peers and be able to debrief and talk about the challenges that are happening. And how do we do that when those principles are tied to some of these areas of contention, right? So maybe talking of setting ground rules ahead of time, like this is how we're going to monitor this to keep it a safe conversation for all of us and come to agreement on that outside of the individual issue, but create the how and the process that will help keep us in a good place in our conversation. Just a thought.
So I have just placed a poll out there and made it live. Hopefully you can see it. If not, at the bottom right of your screen, there's a little icon right second to the right that has the little triangle, square, and circle. And if you click on that, then there should be a poll, but it looks like people are responding. So,
well, and as they respond, I can say a little bit more about what that actually is.
Yes.
At Trauma Informed Utah, we do a Trauma 101. It's a trauma awareness seminar, which is really designed to be that base level that we feel like everyone within an organization, and I mean everyone, from the maintenance person to the front desk receptionist to the finance and accounting people, should have a basic understanding of trauma, resilience, secondary trauma, and self-care, all of those pieces. And so we provide a trauma awareness seminar that's open for everyone within an organization. It's not focused on therapeutic methodologies or even caseworker kind of that. It's not the one-on-one relationship. It's the organizational piece, the foundation for everyone. So that's what a trauma awareness seminar is.
looks like we have 16 people saying yes. No, your responses are anonymous, made sure, so you can be honest.
That's great. I told Travis if there was an interest in Davis County, we would be happy to find a venue and make a session available to all of the organizations, anyone that was up there in the area. Whenever there's a request, we will find a way to be able to provide a seminar and just send out an Eventbrite, and folks can participate or not. And sometimes it's an opportunity for people who typically don't get training in this area, but are critical parts of an organization, like those roles that I mentioned, to be able to participate and get a baseline, so that get that common understanding.
Mary Beth, have you done this training for law enforcement at all?
Not specifically, not that we're not open to it. I think that helping different groups understand the value of this perspective in their different roles can be a challenge. But more and more law enforcement groups are beginning to do it. We're working right now with the 3rd District Juvenile Court on all of the judges and all of the folks involved in that group. They're part of our cohort that we're working with right now. So more and more groups are being able to recognize the value of it.
Yeah, I just had some law enforcement in Davis County had reached out to us wanting some type of training like this. So I was just thinking about it.
Absolutely. If we did a trauma awareness seminar, you would be more than welcome to share the link with them, and we would very much welcome folks from any role like that to participate.
Awesome. Okay, it looks like we are at the end of our time for questions. I just have some wrap-up things, but thank you so much, Mary Beth. That was such a great presentation.
Well, thanks.
Okay.
I'm going to put in a plug for the evaluation, because I really want to. This is a kind of a new presentation for us, so any feedback you have is really valuable. So please, please, please take a second to do the evaluation. I would love hearing your feedback. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you again. Our next forum is also going to be virtual. It's going to be Tuesday, April 29th from 9 to 10:30 a.m. The topic is going to be abuse prevention. And then we do have our Davis Links community announcement folder that Travis is going to post in the chat. And then you can also reach out to Davis Links forums at daviscountyutah.gov if you want any of like your community flyers included in that. That email is also posted in the chat. And then that meeting evaluation that Mary Beth was talking about will be in the chat as well. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day.